There's been a lot of research into the impact of embracing remote work and the benefits and challenges impacting employees and employers in various ways. Now, understanding these aspects can help in creating effective strategies for managing remote work. While these statistics do provide some perspective on how people deal with remote work situations, managing day-to-day operations tends to be overlooked, in my opinion. And if not managed well, can morph into an all-consuming to-do. Where does all of this leave us with managing day-to-day operations, especially in remote work situations? I'm hoping the author of the book, Nine Ways to Leave Your Day-to-Day Operations, can provide some answers. Hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by Sproutwood.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest today is Lloyd Thompson. Lloyd, you're the founder of virtualdo.com and the author, of course, of the book, Nine Ways to Leave Your Day-to-Day Operations. I believe you've spent well over 20 years in the corporate world, both in technical and leadership roles. I'm curious, with your experiences to date, was there a specific incident that highlighted the issues that virtual teams or remote teams in particular experience when it comes to managing operations, as opposed to perhaps your regular corporate enterprise where you might nowadays have more of a mix of hybrid type work as well as in-person work and the operations in that particular context?
Yeah, so actually, I think this is a good way for me to describe how I got into this. And
Sure.
so for me, you're absolutely right. But my background was corporate, leading large global remote teams. For the
Mm.
most part, I had a team here in Sydney where I reside, but I also had large teams overseas. And for me, I've been in corporate for a long time, and behind the scenes, I was just starting to think I wanted to do something different. And my challenge was for me personally is that I was working pretty long hours, and I was starting to think about what my alternatives were. Like, how could I reduce my hours in corporate world when I was an employee? And it's not something I had an easy control over, because I couldn't easily control the hiring if I was trying to get someone underneath myself, how I would change this situation. And then COVID happened. And that meant suddenly we were in Australia anyway, in many countries around the world, we got locked down. And from a work sense, actually my situation improved in the sense that my daily commute was replaced by going surfing. And my team were used to working remotely anyway. We'd long ago moved them over to having laptops so that they could work from home up to 3 days a week quite comfortably. When the lockdown happened in Australia, we were ready for this. And my team overseas, also the same. It didn't really change much. We were used to the trends, patterns of doing this. But for me, my quality of life improved. I got a good hour plus back a day from commuting and going surfing. And this is where, like many people, I started to think about how I would do things different. And I thought, how am I going to reduce my own personal hours? Like, how am I going to prove this for myself? And I thought I could either go and work for a startup. Perhaps that'll be more exciting. I don't know if that's going to mean I'm going to work more hours. Perhaps I can be a contractor again. I was a contractor in the past. Or perhaps I can start my own business, but I hadn't done that before. And it just so happens that in the surfing community that I was a part of, there was a business coach. And so I was having a chat with him in the sea one day, and I said, hey, what about with my skills of leading large teams remotely and overseeing projects and driving process improvement? Is there something I could do to add value or start a business? What could I do? And he said, there's this book I think you should read, and it's called Rocket Fuel. It talks about this relationship between visionaries and integrators. And I hadn't even heard that term integrator before. It sounded like some kind of technical role. He said, have a read of this book and tell me what you think. So I read this book, and it described the visionary person having the big ideas, who works on the strategy and the relationships and shaking tree for business. And the integrator, who I also look at this term as a COO, chief of operations, or a director of operations, or a chief of staff. There's many titles for this kind of operator who runs it. And it defines what they do. And I very quickly just looked at this and I was like, this is me. This is what I do. I'm an integrator. So we had a conversation. He said, perhaps there's a business style where you can set up as an integrator, but a fractional one. what does that mean? You might have heard of fractional CFOs are really common, or fractional
Mhm.
marketers, where you're not paying for someone full time, you have access to them perhaps on a retainer. And he said, perhaps you could set up a business doing that. So this seed of an idea really started to germinate and go somewhere. And then one day he said, hey, I've got a guy as a client of mine. He runs a big e-commerce in the US, actually Vancouver, Canada. He's got a large team. He's working long hours. He's got no time to get on his strategy. He's stuck in the day to day. He just doesn't know how to put in the processes into place, things running like a well-oiled machine. Perhaps you want to have a chat with him. So I had a chat with him and said, hey, look, I reckon I can help you. We looked at what was going on. Anyway, I resigned my job and I started working for him and on a retainer. That was my first client. And so what I noticed was there was things, as you said, what are the differences corporate looking over into these more nimble, should we say, e-com online businesses? There was a lot of challenges in common in the
Mhm.
how to structure teams and so forth. And it was all of his team remote work. But I was able to see his challenges straight away. Yeah, he was stuck in the day to day. He wasn't doing anything on strategy. He was losing opportunities for that. And so what I did is I sat there with a team, listened to their challenges, put rhythms in place, and I could see straight away that there were many opportunities for improvement. And eventually we got it to a point where he was out of the day-to-day operations and he was working on his superpower. He was working on getting new deals, eventually not just from selling stuff online, but into
Mhm.
retail. And so the lesson here is, I think a lot of these online businesses, the founder or business owner is the person, but up to a certain size, they're still doing the operations as well. And it doesn't necessarily make sense when they don't have a large enough team or a large enough budget to hire a full timer, or they're
Mhm.
not sure about it. And so this model allowed him to just test out the role and decide it. And for me, it also allowed me to further develop my offering and go, there's really something here. This is it.
Mhm.
And so that was the beginning of my business. And that's basically how I started this business and seen that there are definitely synergies between corporate
Mhm.
world and the online business world.
That's a brilliant story that you just shared. I can see the value in what you're bringing. However, perhaps some of our listeners are going, that sounds interesting, Lloyd, but I've been working with business coaches who provide a lot of methodologies and talk to me about operations and things of that nature. What would be the distinction you would make between your services as a fractional, or if you will, as opposed to a business coach who would talk or cover some perhaps similar areas, if not the
Oh,
same?
great question. Thank you. Yeah. So I think a business coach is really going to be there offering advice.
Mhm.
Whereas in this case, we're really doing it. So in this case, I was there working with the team. So rather than the founder getting there and talking to their team and working out how work is
Right.
going to get issued, in this case, I came into the business. I reported to that founder, that business owner, and underneath him was me, and then I had the team beneath me. So I'm like his remote control, if you like, to the team, or featured if we're looking at it between a car, the driver down to the wheels,
Mhm.
making sure everything runs smoothly. And then I run the team. And so from his perspective, he's just got a conversation with me that he'd run at least weekly to say, hey, look, these are the things that I want to work on and prioritize. And then I would go out and actually roll it out. So the key difference is we're actually doing it. We're
Mhm.
actually going to not just have the theories, but also go and execute. And so the real key here is making sure that you've got a good operator.
I'd love to dive into that a bit more, but I'm also curious. You mentioned that you saw yourself as an integrator when you read the book Rocket Fuel. Would you say that's your personal area of strength, or in the evolution of time, would you say it's something else now?
Yeah, great question. And on the term of integrator, by the way, now for my business, I've now refer it much more to a director of operations. Why?
Right.
Just because, particularly in Australia, that term
Mhm.
integrator is not so common. And so I'd spend 10 minutes explaining to someone what an integrator even is. So director of operations, that name or title, I think, aha, that's what it is. You're directing operations, you're
Right.
making it happen. In terms of strength, yeah, I am one of these people who is super organized and can get people on board. But what I've realized and what's come to me through feedback from companies that I've worked with is, I would say, it's systemizing with EQ. So getting the buy-in from people, because I think there's lots of businesses out there that can help you systemize and get things in SOPs, make sure that things are running in a way, like the idea of saying, this is going to happen on this trigger event, or these are the processes that are run the business. And there are companies out there that will help you get everything into SOPs, but it's the bit around making it fit that's hard. And to do that, that involves getting buy-in from the team. So I would say our strength, and what's started out as my personal strength, is systemizing with EQ. And I think that's not something that there's enough emphasis on in this industry. Is there's a lot now that's talked about in terms of attention deficit. Like, you've only got so much attention that you can get stuff done. But I also think there's another thing out there, which is you've got only so much emotional bandwidth where you can get stuff done. And so I would say that's where we really offer this benefit of, I certainly make sure that when I'm hiring people now, because by the way, my business has evolved to the point where now I have a team who I now place and support.
Right.
But our unique strength is everyone I hire, I'm looking at them first through the lens of do they strike me as someone who's got strong empathy? Are they someone who I think's got a good level of EQ? Have they got good listening skills? And one of our core values is heart and humor. Is that something that resonates with them? And then why I'm telling you all this is because this is so important for getting buy-ins. When we're going around putting new processes in place, we're not necessarily tearing up the old and just building the new. We're working with the team, understanding and listening what they've done in the past and working with them to build the new. And that is where the making it stick happens, because it's done with the team as opposed to happening to the team.
Yeah, I'm curious. So, would most people come to you when they feel as though they're running around like a headless chook, or are there other symptoms that they are able to recognize before they go, I've got a problem here?
Yes, that definitely one of the triggers. I would say when it feels like the emergency department and you're just running around like that, or that game whack-a-mole where you just whack your ear and a problem comes up there. That's one reason why people come to me, and it's pretty low risk for them because we're just a month-to-month business. It's a month-to-month retainer. So they can go, oh, you know what? We'll just try it out. If it works, great. We'll carry on. If it doesn't. So that's one reason. Another reason is I've seen come to us a few times now is exit. So if there's someone that's thinking of eventually exiting their business and it's the founder is running the operations, they can come to us. Now, with an exit, don't necessarily want someone who's a contractor or a fractional or a service. It's an option, but we can also be there as a stepping stone. We're doing that with a business right now where we come in, we get things smooth and under control, and we put the processes in place, and we can lay the foundations either for a full-time person that they're going to hire if they want to go down that road, or as a preparation step where they've got someone internal in the business who really resonates with their core values, who they want to develop into that role. And so then that's something we've done a few times now where we've come in, we've got the rhythms running in the business, we've got the feedback loops happening and the structures and that run the system. And then someone else in the team can eventually step into that place where they see how the machine runs and what it looks like. And so that's another model where that's worked for us pretty well. And also say another one is just where they know where they're getting to a certain size of team where they know the founder, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the emergency department yet, but the founder knows that, okay, I'm really doing a lot of the operational stuff myself and I shouldn't be as a founder. When you start a business, as I started a business, I was everything. I was doing all of the administration. I was sending out the invoices. I was creating all the content. I was posting out the social media, invoice payable, receivable, you name it. I was doing that as well as doing the delivery. But there becomes a point where you've got a certain team size where you can't do the operation and then focus on strategy and those new deals and
Mm.
partnerships happening. And I've seen that the definite trigger point seems to sit in around when that person's got a team of 10 to 30 staff, tends to be our sweet spot for us. Because what I've seen, and this was a discovery for me too, below a team, below 5 members of staff, they might as well do it themselves. They're thinking, I can run this myself, or the pain isn't enough at that point, unless they're planning on scaling aggressively and growing the team. Around 5 to 10 staff, we can and we have run teams that size. But again, that founder might be tempted to start running it themselves even then if they're thinking, I just want to save money. But around about 10 plus, they're really feeling the pain if they're running it themselves. Like they're really at that point doing everything. They'd have to be super efficient if they're running a team of 10 staff themselves and doing this strategy. That tends to be a trigger point where they think, okay, we want to test out what it looks like to have a fractional person in this role.
And I'm curious, do you also find people coming to you because they express a certain degree of frustration that their team isn't coming to them with initiatives and perhaps solutions as well?
Yeah, that's a common thing, actually. In fact, that is
Right.
a very common pain point that I see business owners have where they think, well, why am I doing all the decision making here? But the discovery that I've made here is when I look at this, quite often it's the founder that's created this environment. You might think,
Mm.
why is it their fault? Won't that team have that initiative? But actually, they're training the team to expect it. Like when that team member comes to them with a problem and that business owner just says, okay, do this, do that. They're training them to do that again and again. And
Yeah.
so what they need to do to get out of that is move into this coaching style where they say, when a team member comes to them with a problem, they're going to say, look, you know what I want is come to me with the options as well. And also the critical point is choose one of them and why. Be in it. The
Mm.
difference, say, between a consultant and a leader, like consultant can say, hey, I've got these different options for you. Here's the pros and cons. But the leader's going to say, oh, by the way, I think we should do option. I'm in this. And so it doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to pick the right option. And you don't even necessarily know what the right option is yourself.
Yeah.
But in order to let go of the reins, you need to start giving them that autonomy. So it starts with helping that business owner let go of the reins by moving into coaching. But it's a double-edged sword because when you start saying to the team, when you come with a problem,
Yeah.
I want with solutions and pick one and why, you also need to make it safe for them to fail. Because if they don't feel safe to fail, then they'll just go back into their box and they'll automatically be back to you with, hey, give me the decisions. And then you as the business owner, you'll be frustrated again with them. And why are they coming to me? So you need to make it safe to fail. And then when they do start coming up with solutions and you can see it working well, then you move further and further back and give them more autonomy. Of course, the reverse is true. If you see things not working out quite right, then you need to go further and further in. And there is a bit in that, in the sense that when they're coming up with a solution, they might not know where to start. So this is where the founder can ask them guiding questions. So if I had a problem that I was going to solve for myself, or a team member comes to me with a problem, in my mind, I would have arrived at a solution and I would have answered certain questions in my mind to get there. Instead of me giving them the answer, I just asked them similar questions and they might arrive at a different answer, but that
Mm.
doesn't the wrong answer. In fact, I've been pleasantly surprised by my team where they've given me an answer that's better than mine. And that's perfect. And
Mm.
so now that's how I've given trust. If there's a business owner out there and they're stuck in deciding as opposed to what I would call delegating, where you're giving them an outcome that you want them to solve, then it starts with asking them those questions. And even if they do get in a director of operations to help them, they're going
Mm.
to have to do a similar thing. They're going to have to let go of the reins and give that director of operations some autonomy. And that starts by asking them the questions and getting them in that place that they can later start developing the team with the same things.
Yeah, but that I would imagine is quite a shift in perspective, going from providing solutions to coaching, which raises, at least in my mind, the issue of uh, okay, let's say we're entertaining the idea of getting a fractional director of operations into the business. Uh, How do we know that the person's going to mesh in with the overall culture and values that the business is really geared towards, as the founder or as the CEO of the business? Make sure that well meshed in, and that it spreads throughout the organization in order to
I'm
take this to the next level.
I'm with you. And so actually I want to talk about one of the mistakes I made in starting this business. In when
Right.
I started hiring people, I first thought I was always hiring for myself. And because that's what I'd always done
Mhm.
before in corporate world, there was an occasion where I placed someone in a team and he was just not a match. He was a good fit for me. He aligned with my values, but in that team, he did not. Like it just, they were chalk and cheese. He was more of a consultative. He would still get the stuff done, but he was more of a very high on the EQ, more of a talker to get there, work out, really
Mhm.
bring people on. And that's very much my style. Whereas the team was very much a direct, straight to the point, make a decision quickly, would prefer to fail in that direction and turn around and go that way very fast. Whereas this person was a great fit for another business where their business involved people who were very, very soft skills, very high in EQ. He fit better somewhere else. So what I tend to do now is start the engagements by doing an audit first. And when we do an audit, we're able to determine what the team are like, what their culture are like, and then make sure that the operator that goes in there is aligned. And
Right.
let's say worst case scenario, it's not aligned. We've got the option to either switch and put someone else in there, or the business decide they don't want to go ahead. Then it's a month to month engagement. It's
Mhm.
very low risk for them. Like it's like, "Yeah, this didn't work out for us. We're not singing on the same hymn sheet here. We won't go down there." But yeah, getting the culture right is absolutely like the real crux of making this work. And I'm
Mhm.
really pleased that you mentioned that because how I was talking about how EQ is something that people aren't focusing enough
Mhm.
on. The culture is just right up there because it's the guts of everything we do. Like when
Mhm.
we're coaching people, if someone does something well, then we look to coach to those values and say, someone does something good and it align with those values. And that's where you want to openly call it out and say, hey, this is a fantastic example of this company value. So and so in the team has done a fantastic job doing this. Just want to raise attention to it. Similarly, when something is not resonating with those values, that's when
Mhm.
you want to privately have a chat with that team member where it's not been working out and say, hey, look, this really isn't what this company represents or what our culture is doing. And I go so far as hiring and firing around values as well. In fact,
Mhm.
quite often when we come into a team, one of the reasons why we don't see performance when we've gone in is quite often at least one team member who, for whatever reason, has been kept on a long time. Perhaps they might have great technical skills, but might be rotting the culture from the inside. And sometimes seen businesses that come to us to do an audit or an assessment, they already know that. And I think they just want validation from someone else to say, are you seeing what I'm seeing? They don't say, hey, there's a problem over here. They bring us in and then we see something so obvious to an outsider. There's a problem over there. And
Mhm.
then when we say, hey, there's a problem here and this is something we really want to fix and should fix, quite
Mhm.
often, oh, thank God, like they've got what they wanted to hear. Someone else said it. Now I understand. Yeah, the culture is so important.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, in your experiences, do you find that most organizations tend to have the culture worked out and perhaps even codified? Or do you find that to be something of an exercise, at least some cases, where you're having to help them do that?
I would say more often than not, it's not solidly written, not written out,
Right.
but I would say more often than not, the founders got, oh yeah, we've got our values. They're here on this document. They were written 2 years ago. But if you go round to the team and say,
Yeah.
what are your core values of the company? I doubt they know. And
Yeah.
there was one I worked with and they said, one company I worked with and they said, oh yeah, we've got the core values. There's 10 of them. And I was like, a business owner, can you tell me what all 10 of those values are? I think 3 to 5 max,
Yeah.
and punchy and memorable, and then coaching around them. So anyway, in answer to your question, quite often they've got them written down, but the team aren't living by it.
Mhm.
They don't. If I was to test the team, I would say 70% of the team don't know what they are. And so early on, we want to find out from the founder, what are your values? What's really important to you?
Mm.
And what is your vision? And so, yes, as a part of that's something we want to get really out there, documented, make sure everyone knows what it is, and then make sure hiring, firing, coaching is all done around those values going forward.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. You talked about the need for culture, creating a safe space for failure as well. I'm curious, as part of the overall culture of the organization and the fact that based in virtual teams, we may be dealing with different cultures as we hire people from across the globe. Obviously, communication is the linchpin to all of this. Could you speak to us about that and how we can make sure that in the overall scheme of day-to-day operations, that communication is not a friction point, but an enabler, if you will.
So important. And don't get me wrong, as much as my whole team is virtual,
Mhm.
if you were to sit down and have a coffee with someone face to face, that is going to be better than virtual. I can't deny that. But the reality is, so many of us have virtual teams and flexible teams. And so that's a big thing in my business is the flexibility. And so that involves having asynchronous style where people are going to be able to send someone messages and respond to it later and so forth. So asynchronous, I'll send someone a Loom video and say, hey, this is something, can we have a look at? Or a message, a voice message or something. But it's important to have a good blend of both synchronous, where I can send something offline and have someone pick it up later, and synchronous. I think a part of the importance of the synchronous, meaning, just in case I'm saying too much jargon to people, synchronous is same time, face to face. When I say face to face, like in a Zoom meeting, get together. That's what I mean by synchronous. It's important to have a healthy blend of that so that people get to build rapport. And actually, that's something that I start every meeting doing, and I encourage, and it's a part of our values, is to, as I said, one of our core values earlier is heart and humor. So we start a conversation by check in with people. How you doing? Make some light conversation. That might sound artificial. It's not. Let's really connect with a person, find out what's going for them to make sure that we really maintain that good, positive communication in the team. Another thing that's important when we're doing this is quite often conflicts or tensions can arrive when people are talking over text. Because
Mm.
if I write something to you, it's very hard for you to see the tone when I send something, and you might read this and think, this guy Lloyd, what's his problem? Where I wouldn't mean, however you read it was not necessarily meant like it was, and how you read it
Mm.
because the tone wasn't there. I really like to, if the culture of the company is okay with it, if they're comfortable with it, put as much use of video chat, even if it's going to be asynchronous, like Loom videos as possible, because showing my body language and how I'm talking gives much more of a tone of what was meant communicating. And another aspect is, let's just say that there is some tension brewing over text, and the director of operations is quite often used as the mediator to calm things down, to get a decision, to mediate any conflict. a simple rule that I have is before they escalate to a director of operations, I want to make sure these people have had a call with each other or had a live Zoom chat first to work it out.
Right.
A step first, person A and person B, Fred and Jane, they've had a disagreement over text before they go and escalate and say, hey, I can't work with this person. They've got this perspective. I've got this perspective at the end. I want them to, or I have a rule of engagement that I bring in with our clients, which is that they will commit to picking up the phone or having a Zoom chat with them face to see if they can work it out first. And that normally gets rid of a whole load of issues by just having a face-to-face over Zoom or whatever chat medium they're using.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So, culture and communication is obviously a critical piece in that, and I'd love to explore perhaps coaching and delegating. But you've also introduced the idea of leaving day-to-day operations as a founder or a leader within a business. Yeah, in fact, you've introduced the concept of 3 ways to leave day-to-day operations. And I was curious, can you elaborate on that and have a taste?
Yes. So quite often I just talk, if I'm talking on a podcast or if someone's asked me, I quite often talk about 3 ways. And the first way I would say is if you're a small business, before you even got a team, you're starting to deliver a lot. You're a one-man band or one-woman band and you're delivering. Normally, the first thing you need to do is hire, get some help, and think, where do I start with that? And so, generally, and this is the first thing, the real who, not how method of, I would say, doing a task audit. So, get down on paper, all of your daily, weekly, monthly, or regular ad hoc tasks. I'll look at those things. Now, the second thing is work out what your effective hourly rate is. However you want to crunch this number, how much do you bill in a week or a month, and divide it by the number of hours you work. Now, this is your item that you want to use as an optimization benchmark. You want to increase your effective hourly rate. And to do that, you want to be able to ship off the items on your sheet, which you could outsource or move at a lower hourly rate, which means that now your time that you've got in the remainder, certainly in the beginning, you can be using to do more delivery or more higher value items. That's really the first step into hiring. And for most businesses, this normally means hiring a virtual assistant remotely. That's normally the first step.
Mm-hmm.
But like I mentioned in my team, I now have a small team in the Philippines and they are amazing and they help me create content. We'll have time together and we'll talk about ideas. Or I watched the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, and we said, let's do some content on that. Like, how does that relate to the leadership lesson? And so my team member will come up with a carousel and some video. Another person will help me get some nice copy to go with it. So content is something they can absolutely help you with. Like I said, invoice payable and receivable, or any kind of process that you could turn into an SOP is a good starting point. And the foundations of building a team. And obviously there's a great book on this. I mentioned Who Not How is the book, is what I use in the title is. I definitely recommend Who Not How. But to start with, most businesses would, if you're like a one person team, or if you find yourself doing all the administration yourself, is it really you that needs to be doing it? I would look at hiring someone. The second thing is the real core of putting rhythms in place in a business.
Sorry, I just wanted to, if I could ask you a question around the who, not how. Would you recommend, at least as you begin to scale, finding someone who can do the hiring for you? In other words, you come up with the draft of who, as is recommended in the book, and then get someone to actually do the hiring for you? Or is that something that you would recommend that people take on, at least for a few times, before they look at delegating it out?
I'm completely with you on that question. In the beginning, it's going to be you. Certainly, when you create your culture, like that first small team, up to 5 people,
Right.
You're going to be learning a lot yourself. Unless you're an business owner, you're going to be learning about how to put culture in place. You're going to be learning the hard way a few things there. But as soon as you've got to that point, like I said, when people are coming to me, it's typically 10 plus, but five to 10 is that kind of gray area where they should think about it.
Mhm.
That's the point where you might think, okay, I have a budget now where I can give this to someone else to do. And why I think it's important in the beginning is because, yes, they're going to be able to set the culture and the tone of what they want their
Mhm.
team to look like. They're also going to learn from this process as well. It's going to be something where they're going to go, okay, I hired someone like this. It didn't really work. And they might have some introspection about why it didn't work. Whereas if they
Mhm.
go straight into handing over the baton to someone else to hire, they might not have that appreciation of what they're really looking for and what's important in hiring. So generally, actually, when I go back to that first point, when I was talking about moving into hiring an administrative assistant, for example, then normally the first things that you hand over are the things that you've already done yourself. You knew your invoice payable and receivable process. So that's a great process that you can hand over to someone else and get them to run. And so the same is in the beginning when you're hiring, you're going to know what the culture is that you're hoping to hire for. And sure, if it was a higher value role, like if it was something really niched, then perhaps if you've never done anything like that before, then you might engage a professional. And if you don't mind and indulge me for a second, I'd perhaps
Sure.
like the quick tangent there, which I spoke a bit about handing over. And I found it quite surprising for me when I started to work with online businesses. A lot of business owners don't know what a good handover looks like.
Mhm.
It's actually a really simple method. And I'd love to just share it here because it's so simple and it's normally a resistance point for business owners not handing over in the first place. And it's as simple as I, we, you, and that's it. So the first thing I do it. It might be my bookkeeping because that's
Mhm.
one of the items that my team do. I do it. And what I do is I go on to Zoom with my team and I share my screen and I hit record and I do it and I take them through what's happening and I talk them through it. And we've got that recording and it can form the basis of an SOP. The next time it comes up, I want my team member to run through that same process. And so this time we're sharing the screen, they're driving, and they're still pretty rusty at this point. They've
Mhm.
only seen one video before, but we doing it. So they're going to drive. And when they're unsure and they're running into problems, I'm there to help them. So we're doing it. And we might have to do this a few times. And finally, when they're comfortable, you do it, which means they do. And so the other thing here, which is surprising from many business owners, is they are the person who's receiving the knowledge is the person who's in charge of writing the SOP. So suddenly, for many business owners, this doesn't seem so hard. What, all I have to
Mhm.
do is share my screen, talk them through it, and they're going to own it. And then the person they've handed over to will be the next person to hand over that process. Because the key processes like bookkeeping,
Mhm.
you really want two people to be able to handle that, particularly in case one person leaves, wins the lotto, whatever. You want to be able to make sure
Yep.
you're covered.
Brilliant. And you were talking about the next point, the rhythms of team operations.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, way number two. Thanks for bringing me back there. So, this is a common thing when we go into businesses that we talked about at the beginning. It's a bit like in the emergency department or something like that.
Mhm.
Quite often that's because they haven't got rhythms in place. So a few rhythms that we normally install, super simple. First one is it's a weekly time slot that always will happen for the business owner and their operator. Let's call them a director of
Mhm.
operations, to have a weekly check-in conversation where they're going to talk about what the priorities are that are going to happen that week. Super important to make sure that the business owner and that point person, that operator, are on the same page. And these are classically a visionary. I would say they're quite often more the creative sorts, full of ideas. That's how they started the business. And they might have a bazillion ideas and they might want to spin 100 plates but they quite often struggle to get traction because they're not focusing on the top things that are going to move the needle the most. So the first rhythm I would say is have that weekly director of operations and founder meeting where they're going to talk about priorities and they're going to set the course for what the team's going to work on that week. 1, 2, 3. What's the top 3 or 5 to get rolled out? Super important. Second one is a team meeting. And that sounds, oh, great, a team meeting. Sounds pretty average, right? We all have a team meeting. We think sometimes these can be a bit unproductive. The idea here is eventually that director of operations, that point person, is going to be the person that runs that meeting. It might have been, if we've been fortunate enough, something that was being run weekly by the business owner. Quite often I've seen this just slip away and it doesn't happen. The point person, the operator, is the person that runs that meeting. And one of the things that's really important that they should be looking for in that meeting is understanding the reds and greens of the business, creating some kind of dashboard of numbers that the business should be measuring and being run by. So it might be sales numbers, it might be marketing numbers, it might be incidents coming out of IT, it might be financial numbers. To everything that's required to get a pulse on the business can be brought up weekly in a dashboard. And this doesn't have to be a fancy tool either. This can be as simple as, and quite often I recommend it starts that way. It's just a spreadsheet with some numbers in it. And what do okay, here's the revenue, here's the number of sales calls, and so forth. And each person in the team will have responsibilities to making sure that number is there for that meeting. Now, the purpose then is we go through around this meeting, we look at what the reds and greens are. And if there are reds, and you're probably, okay, let's just drill down on that for a minute. After you've been running this meeting for a few weeks, it becomes quite easy to work out what a red and a green is. Aha, this sales number is much higher than normal. Great, this is way into the green. Or wow, these sales numbers or these number of calls, that's less than normal. So building up a number of measurables that really tell us what the pulse of the business is so that we can react to it. This is an important rhythm so that everyone in the key leaders of the business, key point people, are getting visibility of what things matter and they can do something about it. And then this is a great opportunity for that director of operations to be able to then prioritize what the top reds are that need to be focused on, like where they're then going to drill down and catch up with the team members. So this feeds back into that first meeting we talked about, that priorities meeting. Hey, we've got some reds here. I think these are the most important ones, 1, 2, 3, that we should be working on. So those are two of the rhythms. The next rhythm is logically going to be where we've got reds and greens. Director of operations is then going to focus on fixing those reds with the people who are in charge of that particular area. And to do that, it might mean getting an understanding of the process. Is there an SOP for that area? I hope so. If there's not, let's get one. And then understanding what that process is. Now, I don't expect a director of operations to be an expert in everything, but they'll have a good understanding and listening skills. They can understand what's happened in the process and what's made it red from the perspective of the person who owns that area. And what do they need to make it a green? Do they need investment? Do they need automation? Do they need some people? And then long term, you might wonder, are they the right people looking after that role? That's another thing, unfortunately, that we have to do. The unfortunate part of being an operator is making sure the right people in the right seats. So that's another rhythm. Team meetings, now the feedback loop of looking at those reds and how we make them a green. And finally, two more. One is to just have retrospectives. So if we've got events or campaigns that are running the business, these are important things to make sure there is actually a feedback loop. Like, okay, an event happened. Did it go well? Great. What went well? Let's do more of that. Let's make sure that is a part of our SOP going forward. What didn't go well? Okay, let's make a template of this event. What do we need to plan for in advance? What can we do to change the SOPs? A really important thing is to, after key events or campaigns, is to have those feedback loops or retrospective meetings. And then finally, the good old fashioned one-on-one.
Mm.
Quite often when the business owner gets busy, they're not necessarily having time to catch up with all their team and understand what's going on. And many people will know what a one-on-one is. They're not just understanding what the goals are of a person or what they should be measuring. Sometimes a one-on-one should also be a unstructured one-on-one. So a lot of people will know a structured one-on-one. How's it going? How are you going on your deliverables? How's it happening on your
Mm.
milestones, your goals, what we're checking in on? That's pretty well understood to most business owners that they're checking in on people, they're checking in on deliverables. But one of the surprising things that people don't necessarily do often, and it plays into our culture piece that we talked about earlier, is having an unstructured one-on-one. You just check in with that person. Hey, how's it going? You don't, what's happening in your life? If they're happy to share that, what's important to you? Where do you want to go? Are you enjoying what you're doing? Can we make sure that if we've got projects coming up, that we can align the interests of that person with the
Mhm.
project, that when the project succeeds, so does the person. And then that's where the magic happens. That's when you get really motivated staff who really want to be there, who really care about the projects, they're personally invested in it. So those are a couple of the ways right there. And finally, actually, the third way, we've actually talked largely about the key
Right.
one is the coaching one. Just the classic one. Someone comes to you with a problem. Don't just give them a solution. Coach them through it. Make sure it's a safe place for them to fail. Build out ways where you can eventually make them autonomous. So it might be a financial level. So after you
Yeah.
trust someone a bit more, you might say, you know what, up to $1,000, I'm now confident that you can make discretionary a decision up to $1,000. And after a while, you can zoom out further and further as you trust those people. Of course, if you become, this was something that didn't go right, you
Mhm.
can zoom further. And when I'm saying you, by the way, quite often I'm now referring to the director of operations who moves into that point of being the person who coaches the team.
It makes some great points there. Obviously, there's a mind shift and what I would often call as a bit of a heart shift as well. You talked about audits earlier on. I'm curious, how would you say that audits contribute to the mindset and culture shift that is often required for a positive change?
Mm. When we go into a business and we're an external company,
Mm.
yeah. When people think, oh, an external company is coming in and they're going to do an audit, but normally I call it an assessment rather than an audit,
Mhm.
actually. So forgive me there for using the wrong
Right.
term. But they're thinking, who is this company coming in? And so generally there is a little bit of defensiveness there. And so normally I communicate to the business owner, hey, just let them know, by the way, that the objective of us is actually not to replace the team. We're actually there to help
Mm.
enable it. Our ultimate goal, ironically, is to make ourselves redundant. If it's a truly well-oiled machine, if the reds are all green, then the role of us as a integrator or a director of operations will be minimal, and that we'll
Mm.
be eventually able to hand the baton over to someone in the team. The key message we say to people is, hey, put your weapons down. We're here to enable you. And when we do the assessment, what we're really interested to know is, tell us what are the problems and tell us what you're also working. So this is, while we do have a structured set of questions,
Mhm.
I normally get the most value out of talking to as many of the team members as possible, particularly the people who are looking after the main functional areas like HR, finance, IT, operations, sales, and marketing, mainly those folks. And I talk to those folks and say, can you tell me what your top 3 pain points are? And then also the things that are working, and really just because one of the things that I see often, you talk to a few people and you'll find the same pain point come up. And this
Mm.
is a really good way to get buy-in early on. If you're this new director of operation, if you can put on the priority list of the founder or the owner and say, hey, you know what? I spoke to your team and this is a common pain point for them. Perhaps they couldn't communicate it to you. This is so common. I think not only does your whole team think this is a problem, but if we can get this one solved for the team, it's probably a pain point for you too. We can get a strong buy-in and collaboration of the team going forward. So normally just listening to the team coming in, because
Right.
you're an external person, you're not going to know their business inside out. A
Mm.
lot of the we're going to have the solutions. They might not just know how to put the rhythms in place and how to get it executed. And that's where we help. So don't get me wrong. Yes, coming in, the first gut reaction of the team is, as an external team coming in, be defensive. But once they've spoken to us, they
Mm.
start to feel more relaxed and they see that, yes, we're actually there to help them rather than go against them. Normally they start feeling a bit more relaxed. And actually what I see quite often is people might start venting to us, we've got this problem. Oh, save us, help.
Yeah.
And then we're in a good place to really make a difference.
Silly. I believe that issues with systems can sometimes stem from how people have been motivated or their personal motivations and certainly where accountability lies. Now, could you provide examples of how accountability and motivation can be used to better manage operations within an organization?
Yeah. I think it can be as simple as making sure that every process has someone who's accountable for it. Like quite often there's a lot of frustration because when there's a task to be handed out, but early on when we start working with business, we'll say, hey, great, can you show us your org chart? And then there's quite, oh no, we have something informal that was updated a few. Okay. First thing is just understanding who's responsible for what. And that's quite often unclear. And that does bring a lot of frustration because when there's an important piece of work, you ask who's going to do it, you might get this one, or you might get two people pointing different ways, or you might have two people that might think it was for them. One of the things that we need to do early on is understand who's accountable for what. And when I say accountable, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the person doing the work. It might be there's a person who's in charge of the team. That person is accountable for making sure that happens. But anyone in their team can contribute and be responsible for it. Really early on, making sure we get a clear view of who's accountable for what task. So it might look like an org chart. People are familiar with an org chart, but with some key responsibilities and accountabilities in there. Like I said, many people can contribute to these particular things getting done. But let's say it was as simple as in my team, for example, I like to have my content posted 3 times a week. This is my own internal team in the Philippines.
Mhm.
If it's not any of my team can post the content, and especially if one person's on holiday, I'm not expecting them to jump back off their holiday and go post the content, but I do want to make sure that they have been made sure that they've handed the baton over to someone else to make sure it happens. So getting a really clear understanding of who is accountable for what. And it's really important that we don't make two people accountable for one thing. If you have if you have two people accountable for one thing, so let's say posting content, no one is, because it's really unclear. You can have two people responsible for it, another person who's going to help out. And that will remove a lot of pain when it's clear who that is. And so for me, in my own SOPs, I've got a list of my for anyone else, SOP, standard operational procedure. I've got a list of my processes and I have a simple, like a spreadsheet or an index. And against each one, it says who's accountable for making sure that happens. And they can choose to help each other out. And I really hope they do, because that's key part of our business is collaboration and enabling others. But having a clear accountability in business is super important.
What about motivations? Often I find that it tends to be somewhat brushed under the carpet, so to speak, in terms of actually understanding the motivations of people in a particular role and whether that's a good match as well.
Oh, great. So when we talked earlier about one of those rhythms, like having those one-on-ones, this is where the unstructured one-on-ones are really helpful, because understanding what people want, like where do they want to go? Do they like, and sometimes it's how they want to work as well. So one of my team members who was located in the Philippines has just moved to Spain, and she wanted to go from part-time for me to, full-time to part-time, and cutting her out, doing a few things, because she now wants to teach English in Spain. That for me is fine. That's one of the things we're proud of is that we can work flexibly. I'm so happy that I'm able to retain some amazing talent that I have in the team. And that was her dream. She wanted to go and teach English in Spain. I think that's amazing. I want to enable their dream and their vision.
Mm.
And so having those unstructured conversations just to check in, see how they're going, really important. And that's what I was also mentioning earlier when we were talking about projects that come up. If you know what their interests are
Mhm.
and there's a particular skill that they want to work on, then perhaps you can give them that task in that project. When the project succeeds, so do they. Another example in my team is I used to do my own video content, and I've got an old Instagram account which I no longer post to called Virtual Do. So if anyone wants to find that funny, they can go there and see some really crazy special effects that I used to do. I took it a little bit far, to be honest with you, and I was just very interested in cut and all of its speeches and special effects. Meanwhile, I found out that one of my team members is really interested in doing video editing, and so I said, okay, perhaps we're going to get you to do the video editing if you want to spend a few hours doing this kind of thing. And the results for both of us have been better. He loves this task. He loves doing it. He's motivated by it. And the other thing is, I found my time back. I'm no longer doing that. And the work output, the content creation as a result is so much better because I just had that conversation about understanding what
Mm.
someone was interested in. And so just in your business, having those unstructured chats and finding out where they want to go can allow them to flourish. And that has a direct result on your own business. It allows your
Mm.
business to improve.
Absolutely. And I'm also curious for companies that would perhaps bring in outside help, like your team. Could you explain how this transition typically works and what business owners should really consider to get to the point where they can start looking at operational improvement? And I'm thinking more in terms of continuous improvement, but within operations.
Yeah. So for us, we normally start with an assessment. So they will engage us. So someone will reach out to me. They've heard me talk on a
Mhm.
podcast, or then they just send me a message to my website, or they're scheduling an appointment with me. And I just listen and understand what challenges they're having. So tell me, is it getting the team organized into rhythms? Does it feel like the emergency department, or are you really working long hours yourself, or are you looking to exit, or just understand their challenges and see if we can help? Then we generally move into an assessment. So I'll kick off with them. I'll find a suitable person who can run that assessment. So I will hook them up with one of my team members who will perform the assessment, and we'll very quickly get a pulse if that person believes they're the right fit to actually execute the work later on down the road.
Mm.
That person, that director of operations, first they meet the business owner, and if the business owner wants to proceed with this assessment, that director of operations will then start getting meeting members of that business's team and just asking them about those questions we talked about earlier, like understanding what their pain points are, what's working well, but then start probing a little bit deeper in terms of understanding how some of their systems and processes work. How do they, for example, do they have SOP processes? Do they have a task management tool? How they, how are they handing out tasks currently? Do they have measurables in place? How are things running? So they'll understand all of these processes. And then what we do during that assessment is we'll check in with a business owner weekly and say, hey, just at a high level, this is what we're seeing at the moment, just
Mhm.
in case they want to say, oh, actually, that's really interesting. Can you go dig a bit deeper over there? Because that's super interesting to us. And then generally take about a month to do that. Like after we've had a few conversations with the key people, dug a bit deeper into the interesting areas. And at the end of the month, we play back to the founder what we've discovered. And then they have a choice whether they want to implement themselves and they want to hire their own operator, or they
Mhm.
want to actually do it themselves and say, oh, okay, we see all the changes you've recommended and we want to do that ourselves. And that's totally fine. Or they realize this is going to take more of their bandwidth to do it and they just want us to. So then we just get going on a month to month retainer. We set up
Right.
a subscription and we get going. And the retainer lasts as long as they see value. If we're not making value, they just stop the retainer. We stop. But generally, if we do an audit, generally people just want us to get going, and we're normally in there for typically 6 months plus. And at that point, some people have had us in there for a couple of years where they're scaling to a point where they can always see a box for us to focus on process improvement.
Yeah.
Cool. We're very happy to help. Or they get to a point where someone in their team is now comfortable to fill the shoes, or they want to hire someone external to fill the shoes. And that's okay. That is the purpose of our business, is to make it a smooth running business, ultimately make ourselves redundant if we've done a good job. And what I'm hoping to get out of this is referrals, because my business largely thrives on referrals from happy customers.
Mhm.
That's the ultimate goal for us. Make it run like a well-oiled machine, make it run green, and get some happy customers so that we have more happy customers.
So and so I can understand operations from the point of view of putting out fires, so to speak, and ensuring that you've got the processes in place and methodologies and the right people as well. But it's perhaps quite another thing to move from, say, a 6 or 7 figure business to an 8 figure business, operationally speaking. It requires perhaps a different mindset, because what got you to where you're at today would not necessarily get you to where you need to be in the next month or year or so.
Yeah.
Are you actually finding people who can help with that transition and that level of improvement?
It's generally focused on the team size. So 10 to 30,
Mhm.
we are working with some 8 figure businesses. But the point might be that at that level of size, they're generally going to hire a full-time COO. So
Right.
we're there to come in, point out like, hey, these are a number of
Mhm.
things opportunities for improvement, start fixing those. And so with one of the businesses we're working with right now, it's quite a big marketing player in the US. They are bringing a full-time COO soon,
Right.
but they're getting the ground ready, pushing out some important initiatives, making those reds
Mhm.
green. And I had some fantastic feedback the other day that they're actually thinking of keeping us on, like when that full timer comes in, keeping us on, but because they're growing so aggressively, they'll keep us on to look after other areas, drive certain initiatives. Yeah, with those 8 figure businesses, we can certainly help with that transition, and they can keep us in for a point that it makes sense. As we
Mhm.
eventually, when we can hand over the baton, or if there's a functional area that I say, you know what, there's still some reds over here, can you focus on that? And so one of the things that we typically do when they get to that level, if we're no longer the person who's driving, we just reduce our retainer and reduce our scope, so that we've still got there from that point of view. We've been in there
Mhm.
for months. We were able to capture all this knowledge, but they can reduce us to a point where it's a really easy transition for them. We're still there if they need us, but we're always there to look at making ourselves redundant, make it a smooth running machine, so that they no longer need to depend on us.
And just to make sure I'm clear on measuring success, we talked about culture, values, and reds and greens. Is that pretty much what you use to measure success with the engagements that you have within a
Yeah,
team?
I would say if the business owner has been confident to hand over the reins to our director of operations, they can now run the team.
Mm.
The team has been bought in and they trust them. We're able to start having that team run autonomously by
Mhm.
coaching. There's that trust there. Like that is a huge win. And so the culture is now, if you can see the culture succeeding and flourishing and people happy with what they're doing, results in the performance. And then there comes those more tangible things, which are measuring those reds and green. Absolutely.
Mhm. This has been a fascinating chat, Lloyd. Thank you for this. Do you find there's perhaps a couple of areas around this idea of operations and operations management that doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about emotional intelligence and EQ
Mhm.
earlier. And I think that there is a perception out there of an A player when people say, hey, I only hire A players. I want to hire an A player. And I think when I drill down and ask them what that is, I quite often hear people talking about some kind of bot. And I actually think that's not what you want. Like, what you want is, in fact, my first level when I'm hiring someone is the empathy skills, the EQ skills, active listening skills. That's the first layer. Then leadership skills, which is actually a large part of it, the project coordination and operational skills, and then the analysis skills. But the key thing in having the EQ, and there's a great book by Jim Collins called Good to Great, where he talks about a level 5 leader. And if those people who talk about A players want to know what an A player really is, look at the L5 leader. And a lot of that is having that listening and understanding and empathy. And just one more point I'd love to share on this is
Sure.
going back to that emotional bandwidth. So important. So I had a customer who, he was an e-commerce educator, and he would stand up on stage to do selling for his business. And then when he came back at the end of the day after doing this, he was also running his team. So he was emotionally and physically exhausted, because he then has to deal with any team issues or fires that have arisen. And so when we were involved, we realized there was so much waste in his team because it hadn't had the attention. Like, the leaders he had in his team were paying themselves overtime while they weren't actually delegating tasks out to their team, because he was just emotionally and physically exhausted. So a surprising learning for us when we got involved and we managed to stop the need for overtime, make sure it was delegated out, etc., and systemized. The surprising feedback I had from this business owner was that he had return on emotion. Not return. He was like, wow, I'm no longer emotionally fatigued. Like, it was so emotionally fatiguing dealing with team issues and people issues, being the person up on stage and selling my business. So I think people don't necessarily realize how it's not talked about enough, how much emotion is involved in business in terms of the culture, in terms of picking the right leader who's emotionally aware and a listener. And then in terms of the tax that it has on you as a business owner when you're dealing with people and people issues, trying to be the salesperson of their business, as they quite commonly are, the on-stage person. So the emotional aspect is the thing that I think is overlooked the most.
So I'm curious, how do you discover whether an individual has the required emotion, EQ and empathy that you're looking for?
That's a tough one. Generally, if I'm hiring, I always look to hire in my network first, because let's talk about the flip side of that. When you're in the case that I go into lots of businesses and I realize there's not a cultural fit, it's normally pretty obvious. In the sense, if you were to list out your values of your business and you were to do a little tick across everyone in your business, you'd normally be able to see who lives up to your values and who does not. It's normally pretty easy to see who does not. And if you've given them multiple feedbacks over a period of time, it's pretty easy to see that they don't belong in your business. And it's normally a tough decision to make. Now, let's talk about the hiring. You don't necessarily know them very well. Yes, when interviewing, I'm going to ask people about different situations which I think are going to involve the need for empathy. And it's going to be the best that I can do if it's an interview. But generally, because I hire in my network, I'll start to build a relationship. The people I know, I build a relationship with them first. And then when I know, I'll bring them in. Of course, there's always a certain level of risk, but I would encourage business owners as well. If you still want to be able to put your strict criteria of what you're looking for, including your values. And then the first lens should be, because people are with you in your business for a long time, they're likely going to change seat and do different things. The first lens you should be looking for is, who do I know that adheres to these values first? Are they going to be the right person to be on board? Then your network before you go out. Generally, I get to know people before I bring them in. It's normally a bit of a slower process to bring someone in.
Okay, brilliant. Lloyd, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I'd say three things. I'll say deciding versus delegating and the importance of coaching. I would say don't let culture slide. That's so important, culture. And then finally, obviously, the emotional importance in business in terms of what I said about emotional importance, emotional quantity, active listening, and how important it is to eventually find a good leader if you want to get out of the day to day who has a good level of EQ and emotional empathy for people.
And if listeners are curious and want to find out more, get a copy of your book, where would you recommend they head to, and where would be the best place to connect?
Yeah, so you can just go to my website, which is virtualdoo.com. And actually, I'm giving away my book for anyone actually watching on the video, 9 Ways to Leave Your Day-to-Day Operations. You can find it on Amazon if you like a physical book, but you can also download it for free as a PDF from virtualdoo.com/book.
Great. We'll include links to that in the show notes. Lloyd, thank you so much for doing this.
Pleasure chatting. Have a good day.